Let's talk now to Alon Pinkas, former Israeli ambassador and foreign ministry chief of staff, as well as advisor to Prime Ministers Shimon Peres and Ehud Barak. Thanks for speaking to us here on France 24.
Thank you. Good morning, Peter.
What's your assessment? How do you think the court might be ruling on this?
Well, it's a complicated question because on the one hand, the court already issued an injunction against the immediate dismissal of Mr. Ronen Bar, the head of the Shin Bet, which is the rough equivalent of the French DGSI or the British MI5 or the American FBI. On the other hand, the Supreme Court cannot entirely or comprehensively prevent the dismissal because, this is what is called a trust position. And if the prime minister lost trust, even though 70% of the Israeli public believe the head of the Shin Bet rather than the prime minister, but if he lost trust in him and feels that he cannot work with him any longer, then there's very little the Supreme Court can do to prevent that. On top of that, maybe I'm preempting a question from you. On top of that, Mr. Bar, taking full responsibility for the Shin Bet's actions prior to and on the day of the catastrophic attack of October 7th, 2023, Bar several times announced publicly that he intends to resign by virtue of the responsibility that he bears. Nonetheless, the prime minister chose to unilaterally and casually dismiss him or fire him.
So is it more of a technical point on him being dismissed rather than being allowed to step down?
Well, you just touched the major conundrum here. On the one hand, there is a technical thing. Was this legal? Was there due process? Were the prime minister's arguments in dismissing him aligned with the law and the regulations and what is customary? On the other hand, and I think this will come out from Mr. Bar's affidavit that will be submitted this morning to the Supreme Court, there is a lot of substantive issues here. The head of the Shin Bet, whom you can see in the picture right now, the head of the Shin Bet argued that Mr. Netanyahu's decision-making process is conflicted, replete with conflicts of interest, number one. Number two, that he allowed knowingly and encouraged the penetration of extreme right-wing subversive elements, quote unquote, into the government by the appointment of extreme right-wing ministers, one as head of the Minister of Internal Security and the other as Minister of the Treasury. Third, the Shin Bet issued about a month ago, issued its own internal, what came out to the public obviously was an abridged version, but its own internal investigation on the events leading to and on October 7, 2023. And aside from taking full responsibility for an intelligence failure and a prevention debacle, there were scathing remarks about the prime minister's demeanor in the days or months leading to October 7th and on that day itself. So there's a lot of substance here, on top of which the head of the Shin Bet is arguing. Along the years, the prime minister, Mr. Netanyahu, had asked him to do either illegal, in the worst case, or certainly improper things in the best scenario, things such as eavesdrop or hack his political rivals' phones and computers and so on. I don't know. I cannot have, independently verify that this is all accurate, but these are the allegations.
Now, regardless of whether or not he was legitimate in doing so, Netanyahu choosing as an option this firing, he must have known that would create a new scandal. Why would he? Surely he was feeling some pressure from the Qatar probe in order for him to do something like that.
Well, number one, you're right. Part of it is the so-called Qatar probe, but again, the Shin Bet is on record, and Mr. Ronen Bar is on record as opposing for a long time, certainly throughout 2022, 2023, the funneling of Qatari money into the Gaza government, i.e. Hamas. But it's not just that, Peter. The prime minister also launched a process of dismissing or firing the attorney general. And as you correctly pointed out, he must have felt that this was going to transpire. And why is he doing it? Well, because he's become a complete, untethered, unhinged agent of chaos in the last year and a half, certainly since the war began, but even throughout 2023, as your correspondent said in the previous segment, during the so-called constitutional coup that he instigated in 23 and now reintroduced 2 months ago. And the head of the Shin Bet is on record as saying, part of my job officially is to safeguard the institutions of Israeli democracy, and I see them being undermined by Mr. Netanyahu. Now, you can argue that this is a J. Edgar Hoover type of he has too much information. His predecessors, the Shin Bets had two predecessors, came out forcefully and ferociously against Netanyahu. On the other hand, Netanyahu has a constitutional right to replace him.
Now, Alon Pinkas, I'm not an expert on Israeli domestic politics, but I believe you served figures from parties opposed to Netanyahu's Likud party, even though there were alliances at one point. How much has Israeli politics changed since then?
Israeli politics changed. I mean, again, we're not going to go over 75 years of Israeli politics on this show, obviously, Peter. But I think that Israeli politics changed tremendously since Netanyahu was elected in 2009. But it exponentially changed and drastically changed the entire dynamics and public discourse once he was indicted on 3 charges of corruption, obstruction of justice, and breach of trust. Those investigations began in 2017 and matured into indictments in 2019. Ever since then, Netanyahu, and then he lost an election in 21 and again won in late 2022. Since January 2023, he basically declared war on Israeli democracy. I mean, Orban Hungary style, Erdogan Turkey style, and now he has a soulmate in the White House, Donald Trump. They're all thinking alike. It's anti-judiciary, anti-elite, anti-expertise, anti-deep state, anti-media, anti. And part of doing that is to constantly divide the electorate, divide the public. And that is how politics changed, because you see, it's no more than 20%.
Of course, the other thing that's presumably allowing him to take this approach is the Gaza war. Does it need to end before Israel can sort out its politics?
Well, part of what he's trying to do, Peter, is distance himself from his responsibility, from which he never admitted. And look, the chief of the general staff, the IDF, the Israel Defense Forces chief of general staff, resigned. The head of military intelligence resigned. The commanding officer of the Southern Command resigned. The head of the Shin Bet, in whose honor we're having this conversation this morning, already indicated more than once that he intends to resign. So Mr. Netanyahu wants to purge everyone or anyone that was in any position of power in 2023, in October 2023, distance himself from that debacle and calamity. By doing so, he thinks he could stay in power. That is why he has prolonged the war, and that is why he's been provoking Iran for the better part of the last year.
So do you think the moment he stops the war, he will then think, I'm done?
Yeah, because he looks at the polls. He could read polls just as good as you and I, probably better. And he knows that 65% of Israelis want him to resign, and 70% think that the war should stop in exchange for a hostage deal. And over 70% think he's responsible more than anyone else. Yeah, maybe the IDF failed, and yes, maybe the Shin Bet, failed in providing accurate intelligence on the morning of October 7th, but he was the prime minister. If this had happened in France or in Britain, the president of France or the prime minister of Britain probably would have resigned a long time ago. And so he knows that once the war stops, not only will public animosity and protest creep up on him. But even his coalition may disintegrate because the extreme right wing want this war. I mean, they've been pushing him. That is why the war has resumed 31 days ago. Remember, there was a ceasefire from January until the 18th of March.
Former Israeli diplomat Alon Pinkas, thanks for speaking to France 24.
Thank you, Peter. Good morning.